Hello and welcome to week 21 of reading the Bible in a year. Hope you're doing well and being blessed by God's Word. We're still in the midst of this period of the Kings, our second reading through of it as we read through 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Reminder that it's sort of a revisiting of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, but now the emphasis is almost exclusively, well, actually is exclusively on the southern kingdom. The only time we hear about the northern kingdom is in its interactions with the southern kingdom. So this week we're reading through 2nd Chronicles chapters 8 through 30. It almost brings us to the end. Chapters 8 and 9 are sort of the tail end of the reign of King Solomon, and then his son Rehoboam takes over. And things start to get bad from there. But before we go there, chapter 9, we have a visit from the Queen of Sheba that comes to see King Solomon because she's heard about the amazing things that he's done, and she doesn't believe it, so she comes to see for herself. And in the midst of it, she lifts up this praise to the God of Israel for all that he has done, acknowledging that it's the God of Israel and not really Solomon that has done this. And that goes along with Solomon's temple prayer, where others would come from foreign lands and lift up praise to God because they would see the things that he's done. So this is a beginning of that fulfillment, or a small glimpse of that fulfillment. But then after King Solomon, things sort of take a bad turn. Remember, 1st and 2nd Chronicles sort of idealizes the kingly line as a pointing forward to the messianic king that is to come, promised through King David. But there's so under David and Solomon, the good things are really emphasized. But then after that, it sort of turns sour. Rehoboam makes the bad decision of following the advice of his younger advisors, who says to oppress the people more when they complain about their workload. And the people rebel, and the kingdom of Israel splits. The northern kingdom is called Israel. The southern kingdom, which is made up of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, stay together and become known as Judah, because Judah is much larger than Benjamin. And so the Davidic line continues through the southern kingdom of Judah. We get after this point, you're going to see sort of a weaving back and forth between good kings and bad kings. It's not exclusively alternating. It's not one good, one bad. There's a few good, a few bad, and it sort of goes back and forth. And then there's kings that start off good and then turn out making mistakes. So we've got Asa in chapters 14 to 16. He removes the false idols of the foreign gods that had been established and reforms the people of Israel. And then you get a few other good kings that follow him till you hit chapter 21, and then you get Jehoram, and it says that he is a king like the kings of Israel. And so even though they're not talking about the northern kingdom, the assumption of the writer of the Chronicles is that the people are familiar with what happened in Israel during that time, where almost every king was bad. They had like one or two, I think, that actually sought after God. And so Jehoram follows in the line of the kings of Israel. So that sort of becomes a recurring insult or criticism of some of the kings as they turn from the ways of God. They become like the kings in the north. Chapter 24, you get Joash, who does great at the beginning, restores the temple, but sort of falls apart at the end and turns away from God and reestablishes some false idol worship. And then you get a series of good rulers following him until you get Ahaz in chapter 28, who's a bad king. And then 29 to 32, which sort of leaks over into next week, I know, we get the reign of King Hezekiah, who really does a great job of ruling over Israel, restoring things to following God. He stands up to the attacks of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, that are Assyria that had taken over the northern kingdom, who comes in and sort of repels him. Doesn't really do it himself. He does it by repenting, turning to God, and praying for God's blessing, and God repels Sennacherib. He has a little glitch at the end, which we'll talk about next week in chapter 32. But by and large, Hezekiah followed after the ways of God. So what should you be thinking about as you read through this? The really big thing about this entire section is that even though we've got this interweaving of good and bad kings, God does not leave them. God is still with them, and He is preserving this line. If you go back to First and Second Kings and read the sections on the northern kings, um, you'll see that their lines, their royal lines, last about 2 or 3 generations before one family is killed off and another family comes to rule. So every time they sort of go off the path, the families fall apart. That doesn't happen in the southern kingdom. This is the land of God's promise. This is the line of God's promise. And so God preserves them. Even when they go astray, God continues to remain faithful and preserves that Davidic kingly line. And that will continue through the book. When we get to the end, we'll see that even in the exile, there's hope that is given at the end. So we'll talk about that next week as we finish up Second Chronicles and move into the restoration books of Ezra and Nehemiah. God's blessings as you read through His Word this week. I pray that you'll be strengthened in your faith and seeing God's faithfulness to His people in the Old Testament, and be reminded that indeed God fulfilled that messianic promise in bringing His Son and is faithful to us today.